Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Izuku ate the mochi no mi? AizenTheGoat wrote this amazing story. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. The following day at school, Izuku found himself somewhere he'd never thought he'd end up at. The principal's office. Well, he was actually sitting on a chair outside his office while waiting to be called inside, but still. If he was still the timid, powerless kid he'd been before, he'd most likely be having a panic attack and on the verge of tears, wondering what he did to end up here. That wasn't the case now, though. Now he had an idea of why he'd been called. It was bound to happen sooner or later, but he was ready. Midoriya-san, Principal Nizu will see you now, the secretary told him. He exhaled as he stood up and knocked twice on the door. A few seconds later, he was given permission to enter. Inside, he was a little relieved to see that it was only the small rodent in the office and no other heroes. Young Midoriya, thank you for coming, please take a seat, Nizu told him, motioning to the couch across from him. So, how are things going for you in the hero course? He asked. Well enough. I was quite surprised when I found out All Might would have a hand in our lessons, but everything is going good, all things considered. Nizu nodded. I'm glad. Now you're probably wondering why you're here, yes? He asked, but continued before his student could reply. Let me alleviate any worries you may have by telling you you've done nothing wrong and you're not in trouble. I just wanted to ask you some questions about your quirk, if you didn't mind. Izuku shook his head negative, giving the principal the okay. His hunch was right, he was ready. Now on your registry form it says you're quirkless, but we can see that isn't true. He trailed off, leaving his question unasked. Izuku coughed to clear his throat. I developed my quirk much later in life compared to other people. Once it manifested my mother, and I must have forgotten to update it at the registry. Seeing as we thought I would be quirkless, you can understand how that form wouldn't be the first thing on our mind. I can update that after school if it's an issue. Izuku was thankful that the principal hadn't interrupted him during his explanation and was slightly surprised when he shook his head no to his offer. There's no need, we can take care of that for you. I just needed a reason for why it was updated this late. Things were quiet for the next few minutes as Nizu filled out a form before stamping it with his seal and filing it away. Okay, one more question. Aizawa recently had Class 1A go through a quirk apprehension exam. He had a suspicion that you were holding back. This is because we watched you during the entrance exam. He was going to lecture you about it during the exam, but to his surprise he couldn't erase your quirk with his. Of course there is limitations to his quirk, but yours doesn't seem to meet the requirements to be unaffected. So I'd like to know if you had any idea why this would be. Izuku rubbed his chin and closed his eyes. This is it, I have a theory. My quirk is a special mutation type. He began. He knew he had piqued the principal's attention as the small mouse sat up a little straighter in his seat. My body is literally made of mochi, I just will it to be my body, if that makes sense. It took a while to stop myself from melting, but now it's second nature. I believe it's because I can change my body composition that it manifested so late. Only showing up until I'd be able to not die from turning into mochi and never turn back. So it's a mutation quirk that acts like a transformation quirk due to me being able to manipulate my body at will and emitter as I can control and alter it at will. But at its base it's still a mutation. He finished his explanation. Nizu observed the boy as he explained. The explanation made sense, but he couldn't help but feel that something was still off. He decided against questioning him about it at the moment, however. Well, that certainly does help clear up the issue. Thank you for clearing that up for me, young Midoriya. You're free to go back to class. Izuku nodded and headed out. Once he left the administration section of the building, he let out a deep breath. That went better than I thought, he thought to himself as he walked down the hall back to Class 1A. He opened the door and ignored the curious stares from his peers, who were no doubt wondering what he'd done to get sent to the principal's office. He sat down and opened his notebook. At the moment, Midnight was currently going over a lesson in modern art. He stared at what she had written on the board and realized he already knew what was going on. Still not wanting to be the odd one out, he doodled on the page for a few minutes before he remembered something important. He peeked over at Momo and quickly and stealthily ripped a part of a page out of his notebook. He jotted down a quick sentence before folding it and waiting for Midnight to turn back to the board. Once her back was turned, he tossed the paper to his neighbor's desk before resuming looking at the board. Out of the corner of his eye, he watched as Momo read the note before writing her reply. Please be good news, he thought to himself as she continued writing. Once Midnight turned around again, he felt something hit his head before hitting his desk. He blinked. Again. He slowly turned to look at the girl to see her wide eyes with her hands covering her mouth in shock at what she'd done. He quickly scanned the room to find Kaminari also holding his mouth. Though from the constant rising and falling of his shoulders it didn't take a genius to know he was trying not to laugh at what he'd seen. Ignoring it for the time being, he grabbed the paper and let a small smile appear on his face. "I can make it. Can you stop by my place after school today?" It read. "Yes," he yelled in his mind. Scrunching up the paper, he turned to her and nodded in confirmation before turning his attention back to the board. The day passed by pretty quickly in his opinion after that. Luckily they didn't have a heroics lesson that day and 3 hours breezed by. "I need to get something from my locker. Do you mind waiting for me out front?" Momo asked him as he was cleaning the tops of the desks. "Yeah, no problem. I just finished here. I'll meet you outside," he replied as he put the cleaning supplies away and grabbed his stuff before heading out. As he leaned against the giant gate, he pulled his phone out, sending a quick text to his mom letting her know he'd be home a little later. 10 minutes he saw her walking his way and pushed himself off the wall. "Thanks for waiting. You ready?" she asked. The two walked off in the direction of her house and held casual conversation regarding today's lessons. It took a lot of effort on his part not to ask about the trident as he wanted to go in blind. His mind did go blank for a few seconds, however, when they finally reached her house. Actually, the word house was a bit of an understatement. She lives in one of those American junior colleges, he thought to himself as he took in the sight of the giant compound. The gates that protected the Yayarosa home opened after Momo typed in a code on a keypad nearby. He tried not to stare at everything as they walked to the entrance. "Welcome home, Momo," a young woman in her early 20s greeted as they walked inside. "Would you or your guest like something to drink?" she asked. "No, I'm okay, thank you." He politely declined before looking to Momo, who looked completely nonchalant as if this wasn't strange at all. She declined too before motioning him to follow her to the training ground. As they headed deeper into the home, he couldn't help but notice that there was some very expensive paintings along the walls. He even saw a room with cleaning supplies that was bigger than his entire apartment. Finally, after a few minutes of walking, they finally stopped in front of two large reinforced doors. "Right through here," she said as she opened them. Inside was a giant personal gym equipped with everything from punching bags to speed bags. In one corner there was weightlifting equipment, training dummies, and a large open space for sparring if the mats were any indication. "All right, here we go," he heard her mumble before she turned around. He could tell she was unbuttoning her shirt because of how her arms were moving. Before he could think of anything, he noticed bright lights emanate from her, and after a few seconds noticed her hand grip something. He could feel the excitement build up as she buttoned her shirt back up, knowing exactly what she had in hand. She took a few breaths before turning back around. Taking a look at how tired she looked, he immediately felt a little bad since this obviously took a lot out of her. He'd have to make it up to her somehow. As Izuku was about to apologize, she beat him to it. "Here it is." She presented the trident to him. "It's created to your exact specifications. It took me a couple of hours to memorize the exact composition and structure of the metal you chose, but I got it. What do you think?" she asked hopefully. Izuku held the trident in front of him and was completely speechless. "Looks even better than Katakuri's," he thought as he inspected every inch. "It's amazing," he complimented as he spun it around a couple of times. "Now let's hope this works," he mumbled to himself. Momo was going to ask what he meant but stopped as she watched the greenette begin to absorb the trident into his body. Before she knew it, the entire thing had been consumed by the mochi Izuku produced. Said boy began moving his arm and shoulder in awkward angles as he seemed to try and adjust the trident in his body. "This is really uncomfortable," he thought. How did Katakuri keep this thing inside and move normally? He wondered before pushing it back out. "Until I can find a better way to store it, it'll have to do, I guess." He looked to the trident before glancing at one of the training dummies Momo had set up in the room. "Would you mind if I tried this out on one of your dummies?" he asked, pointing at one. She shook her head no. She was curious to see how he would use the weapon, as not many people really used it these days. Plus she makes them herself, so she'd never be short. Having been given the okay, Izuku stood across from a dummy and took a deep breath. Willing his forearm into mochi, he then inflated it, though this time he didn't build pressure like he had done in the past. His hand holding the trident began spinning at rapid speeds before he launched forward. "Mochi thrust," he thought as he extended his arm. As expected, the trident met the dummy and encountered no resistance as it removed a chunk of what would have been a person's torso. "I get the feeling a move like that isn't going to go over too well with the Hero Public Safety Commission," Momo commented as she took a good look at the mutilated dummy. "Yeah, probably not," he agreed, removing a piece of the dummy off the tip of the trident. "I'll probably just have to aim for a leg or something." Momo raised a finger in the air ready to tell him that it wouldn't really make it any better but stopped as she realized he wasn't paying attention. So how much do I owe you? Izuku asked, pulling out his wallet. Oh, you don't have to worry about paying me. You're a friend and fellow future hero. She replied, waving her hands in front of her. But if you get in trouble or questioned about the weapon, you didn't get it from me. Izuku looked at her, then back down to his wallet. I still feel like I owe you. Fine, how about you owe me one? She offered, seeing as he really wanted to pay her back somehow. He stopped, contemplating the offer. Alright, if you need me for anything, give me a call no matter the time. He agreed before letting his mochi swallow the trident back into his body. He moved around slightly to adjust the positioning before turning to the door. Well, thank you for all you've done, Momo, but I should be going now. Think nothing of it. She smiled and pulled out her cell phone. Before you go though, would you mind exchanging numbers? It would be beneficial to have contacts from class should anything happen, she added. Izuku could see the logic in that and agreed. The two exchanged numbers and bid each other good night. It took the boy about 25 minutes to get home from the small compound, and the first thing he did when he arrived was push the weapon out of his body. He immediately felt much better. The closest he could describe the feeling would be similar to the feeling of having a rock in your shoe but inside your body. It was plain uncomfortable. He let out a relaxed sigh as his body felt normal again. Quickly picking it up, he moved it into the closet before his mom walked in and asked questions about it. Though she trusted him, he wasn't sure he could explain why he needed a weapon like it. A couple hours later, he was in bed ready to get some rest. However, right before he turned his lights off, he heard his phone vibrate from his nightstand. He frowned. Who would text him at this hour? It turned out to be Momo, much to his curiosity. Hello, Midoriya. I hope you don't mind the late message, but I forgot to mention an important feature of the trident that might help you out. It's one of the reasons it was so hard to make. He read quietly. Continuing on, he was instructed to pick up the trident and take a look at the base. Before doing so, he closed his eyes and extended his senses. A light green shape was motionless, besides the subtle signs of breathing in the next room over. He quietly headed to the closet and pulled the weapon out and checked the base. There was a very small button towards the bottom. The message said to click it. Upon doing so, a pin about an inch long sprang out from besides the button. Instantly, the spear began to collapse in on itself. Looking at it now, Izuku could see that the handle was made in layers that were just barely smaller than each other in diameter in order to let the trident collapse. Similarly, the tips of the trident also spun into each other, creating a single tip. The entire thing was now about a fifth of its original extended size. Smiling, he turned his arm into mochi and found that he could store it in his forearm without any discomfort. She really thought of everything. Don't know if she knew I could store things in my body, but still. He thought happily. Until he could store it like his predecessor, this would be how he'd do it for now. Sending her a quick thank you message, he contemplated pushing the trident out but decided against it. Katakuri seemingly always had it on him. You never know when you'd need it. Little did he know how soon that would be. A few days later, the students of Class 1A were excited. They were having another heroics lesson. This time, though, it was different. They were in full hero costumes and were told they'd be heading off campus for their lessons. Aizawa explained that their training would be focused on rescuing civilians from disasters. Naturally, there was only one place that could help them with that, the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ. Everyone was currently talking amongst each other, going over how their quirks were either suited for the job or flashy enough to attract attention. All for 3 students, those being Todoroki, Bakugo, who was glaring at the back of Izuku's head, and the Greenette himself. He sat next to a window with his eyes closed, simply listening to everything going on. After 45 minutes on the bus, they finally reached their destination and were greeted by Pro Hero 13 and led inside. Thank you for coming, everyone. As you may or may not know, the USJ is a simulation joint, as its name implies, that focuses on different scenarios. You have things like shipwrecks, landslides, fires, and the likes. 13 told them before looking at their teacher. Aizawa moved forward. Alright, listen up. For the rest of the lesson, you'll be in 13's care and will. He stopped as there was a surge in the building before the power was cut off. There was still plenty of light, seeing as it was still daytime, but everything was noticeably quieter. Down below in the center of the USJ, a dark blue portal appeared and a shadowy mass emerged that took the form of a man. Aizawa frowned and turned to his students. Everyone gather round. Try and see if you can contact the school, he ordered. As it so happened, their signal was being jammed. Probably someone with a quirk from nearby. One of you is going to have to go by foot back to the school and relay what's going on. A couple seconds passed by before it was agreed that Ito would go, as his quirk was pretty much built for speed. Aizawa-sensei, what do we do in the meantime? Kirishima asked. Stay put, he ordered as he put on his yellow goggles. Those are villains. Izuku watched as a man with hands on his face and body was standing next to the shadow man and was giving the others directions. He also noticed a large creature with the top of its head exposing its brain stand next to him, though the creepiest thing in his opinion was that it was wearing pants. 13 watched the students, Aizawa ordered right before he jumped down into battle. Izuku watched with newfound respect as his sensei began beating villains left and right. Using the metal-woven scarf, he'd capture multiple villains at a time before knocking them out. He was even able to accurately predict their fighting style and counter. His quirk doesn't give him any sort of power boost, but he makes up for that with his technique in mind. As he watched Aizawa jump off one of the villains' heads, a red color appeared in his mind, warning him of impending danger. In a split second, his leg was coated in hockey up to the knee and he spun around, kick at the ready. He felt his shoe connect with metal, specifically the center of the portal man's chest. Before he could follow up, he noticed multiple portals appearing under his classmates, sending them away. He didn't worry too much, however, as he could see the villains splitting up into groups, each heading into different areas of the USJ. He's just splitting us up, he thought. Dividing us will make us easier pickings. When he turned his attention back in front of his, he scowled, noting that the man was gone. Hearing a loud boom, he looked back down and saw that Aizawa was still battling the fodder, though he did note that the man's elbow was red. Squinting, he could see that the red was actually part of the man's tissue. He had to help. Taking in a deep breath, he focused on his surroundings and saw a red claw coming down onto a green familiar shape. His eyes snapped open. He wouldn't be able to stop it in time, but could at least help his chances of survival. As he'd expected, the giant dark beast brought down its hand onto their teacher in brutal fashion before jumping on his back, applying all his weight. Grabbing onto the railing, he allowed his arms to turn to mochi and began to pull back. Once far enough, he jumped, letting the momentum propel him forward. Mochi slingshot. As he soared through the air and neared the beast, he cocked his arm back. Mochi elephant gun, he mentally cried as he forced his right arm to increase in size dramatically. Once the fist was roughly 50 times the size of his body, he willed the hockey to coat it. He thrusted his arm forward and smirked when the beast was hit directly. Taking advantage of the fact that the beast was currently flying towards the other side of the building, he increased his hand size once more and picked up his wounded teacher. Sensei, are you okay? The man grunted in slight pain but responded. One of my arms is broken and my back is in pain from when the thing jumped on me. It's as strong as All Might even after I erased his quirk. A monster equally as strong as All Might? That was worrisome. He jumped back in time to avoid being crushed by a large arm. He didn't have time for a breather as he had to duck and jump again to not get hit. Damn, we have to get away, but it just keeps coming. Put me down somewhere. I can still fight, albeit in some pain. Get the students to safety. Aizawa grunted out. No offense, Sensei, but right now you couldn't fight your way out of a paper bag. Izuku replied, ignoring the glare he got in return. You go help the students and I'll hold this bird thing off. Trust me, he pleaded. The homeroom teacher stared at him for a few seconds before making his decision. He let out a tired breath, not believing what he was about to condone. Fine. But if it becomes too much, retreat. Help should be coming soon. Don't make me regret this. The man began lightly jogging, as much as he could anyways, towards the closest students. His hair beginning to rise as his quirk took effect. The green-haired boy turned his attention back to the bird who was now charging at him. He willed his fist to increase to a size just larger than that of his opponent's and met the fist head-on. A small shock wave erupted as the two fists met before another followed once his other fist met a punch. The two managed to get into a small deadlock as each punch was mirrored over and over again. He had to thank whatever deity was out there that he had his observation hockey, as it made reading the punches easier. Though he did notice the bird wasn't getting slower and could possibly keep it up longer than him. Have to save my stamina, he thought. Time to really test my abilities. He stopped the punches and moved back slightly, letting his hockey recede. This was it. He closed his eyes and focused. He could sense the bird in front of him, the guy with the hand on his face a bit away, and even some classmates who were out of danger. Even with his eyes closed, he could feel the stares they directed at him. The Nomu is as fast and strong as All Might, the hand guy said as he scratched his neck. There's no hope for you. Nomu, hurry up and kill the kid, he commanded. Doing as its leader said, the now dubbed Nomu ran forward and began throwing a barrage of punches, all faster than it had before. In Izuku's mind something clicked. The colors changed. He now saw a clear image of the Nomu and what it would do, where its punches would land and what it would do next. He felt his heart rate increase as the Nomu neared. His classmates all watched in awe at what they saw next. Izuku's body simply shifted out of the way of the punches in the form of creating holes in his body exactly where the punches were supposed to land. Opening his eyes, he glared at the Nomu and continued to allow the punches to miss. Unbeknownst to him, however, his eyes had glowed a bright red color for a split second. He kept his eyes on the beast as the punches seemed to come at him in slow motion, letting him know where he'd have to shift. "What did I tell you? Kill him," the leader yelled. The Nomu complied but stopped his assault, opting instead to jump high in the air and try and crush him. "Damn, I have to do something until help comes. It doesn't get hurt with punches and it doesn't get tired. I need something that will actually hurt," he thought as he used the elephant gun to punch it away once it landed. As his arm retracted to normal size, he felt something. That was it. He smiled to himself as he realized his plan might work. He extended his arm downward and let it turn into mochi. Those watching were curious what he was doing and blinked in confusion when they saw something come out of his arm and fall into his hand. Clicking a button, he smirked in satisfaction as his trident took shape. Even the Nomu stopped briefly before jumping high into the air to try and crush him again. Izuku inflated his forearm before coating the trident in haki and began to rapidly spin his arm. "It's not a person, so the laws don't apply to it. This is my only chance," he thought as he crouched down. He jumped back and waited until the Nomu stood back up to full height. "Now, mochi thrust," he mentally yelled as he dashed forward and thrust. Those spectating had wide eyes as they watched the spinning trident took a large chunk of the Nomu's side. Blood splattered onto the ground and the ear-piercing scream from the Nomu forced many to cover their ears. Unfortunately for it, however, Izuku wasn't done with him. The young hero in training grabbed the beast using an inflated hand and took to the air. As he reached peak height, he began spinning rapidly, forcing the beast to spin as well. Eventually they began their descent, still increasing in speed. Once they were almost back on the ground, Izuku tossed the Nomu down, increasing its velocity even further. The building shook slightly and the impact created a small crater in the ground hard enough to kick up debris and dust, covering everyone's vision. Once the dust settled, they saw the Nomu struggle to get up as it was missing a large part of its body as it couldn't absorb that much shock. Izuku stood a few feet away, taking deep breaths while staring down at it. He felt tired. This was the furthest anyone had pushed him so far and he'd come out victorious. Though it wasn't easy. He could feel his arms shaking slightly and he felt out of breath. "You useless piece of shit," the leader said angrily as he scratched his neck violently. He was cut off as a loud boom echoed through the building before someone landed next to the young hero. "Don't worry, young students. Everything is fine now. I am here," All Might said as he glared at the villains. 3 days later. "I keep going." Izuku grunted as he continued on the bench press. It had been a couple of days since the incident at the USJ and the students had been given a few days off because of it. News of an attack on one of the most famous hero schools in Tokyo spread like wildfire and threw the public into a panic. The villains were getting bold. Because of this, the school rallied to find a way to calm the public, especially the parents of the students. In the last few days, the young hero in training had eaten more than he usually did. After the battle with the Nomu, he'd felt weak. He theorized that in order to fully utilize his devil fruit, he'd need a lot of energy. This hadn't been a problem before because he'd only faced small-time thugs and bakugo once. Nothing to make him actually work. Hence why over the past couple of days he'd eat about 4 times the normal amount and strangely enough never once got sick from it. Another thing, his Kenbunshiku haki had gotten stronger as a result of the battle. During the battle he finally had clear images in full color and background. The only problem was that he couldn't call upon in at will like katakuri could. If he focused he'd see the usual colors and even feel the intent, but in more stressful situations he seemed to be able to clearly glimpse into the future. Pushing the bar back in place, he wiped his face with a towel he'd brought and turned his attention to the TV. On damn near every channel since the incident, the attack is all they'd cover. Currently the station was showing film of the police taking what was left of the Nomu into an armored car while some pro-heroes were on the scene. Seeing this, he frowned slightly in annoyance. Once All Might had arrived, the ringleader and his portal lackey had retreated with their tails between their legs. Soon after, more heroes along with police and paramedics also arrived. Aizawa-sensei had been treated along with any other injured students. Tsurigami, the chief of the police, had also asked to have a word with him once everything was mostly under control. Since they were attacked, no one was reprimanded for using their quirks without a license, but he did have his trident taken. Originally the police had wanted to hold on to it, but in the end had an agreement with UA and the school got possession of it. He was questioned as to where he'd gotten it, but he'd kept his word to Momo and kept quiet. Seeing as they weren't letting up, he'd ended up telling them that he'd bought it online. He was sure they didn't buy it, but seeing as it had been useful in saving their lives, they'd let it go. While he was annoyed, he wasn't too upset about it though. He was certain he'd get it back. It might take a little while, but he'd get it back. Worst case scenario, he'd have to ask Momo to make another one. He turned his attention away from the TV and headed over to the dumbbells to continue his workout for the day. The rest of his day consisted of eating meat and watching anything other than the news. Next day, all of the students were finally back in class. Some even relieved, as being home with nothing to do was starting to have people antsy. The day was mostly over and were on their last lesson of the day. It wasn't as exciting as other days, simply general education courses. Currently he was jotting down notes on his personal notebook while their current teacher packed up his things. He was writing down a theory on how to turn his surroundings into mochi as he'd seen his predecessor do. Currently nothing had worked. "All right, settle down," came the voice of Aizawa as he walked through the door. "I know it's been a hectic few days and it's going to continue." Some of the students frowned, wondering what he was talking about. The UA Sports Festival is coming up soon. This seemed to get all the students minus a few excited as murmurs broke out. Ida, being the responsible one, he was got the class under control, his hands doing chopping motions as he spoke before he turned back to their sensei. "Aizawa-sensei, is it wise to hold the sports festival so soon after a villain attack?" he asked, concerned. "Yes. We can't cancel the festival as that would show weakness. By continuing as planned, we show that we're still in good shape and it'll keep morale up." He looked around and asked if there was any questions. No one spoke up, so he continued. "Many pro heroes will be in attendance or watching from elsewhere, looking for talent to possibly recruit after graduation. This is your chance to get noticed by the biggest names in the hero industry, so I suggest you begin training. There's not much class time left. Go ahead and clean up, then you're free to go." He finished before collecting his papers. Once he finished talking, all the excitement came back full force. Kirishima was talking to Bakugo loudly about how they'd be able to show how manly they were to the pros, while others were wondering how to start training. "Are you excited for the festival?" he heard Momo ask him. He glanced at her and sprayed his desk with disinfectant and started wiping it down. "I don't know if excited is the right word, but it'll be interesting." "Are you?" She nodded. "It'll be a good chance to see where I stand in the school. I've been training with my quirk harder than ever after the attack, so I feel pretty good." "I'm glad. I hope you make it far. Also, I'm sorry about the trident. I'll get it back, I swear," he replied, the last two sentences in a hushed whisper. He could see she was about to tell him not to worry about it, but he beat her to it. "It was difficult to make and clearly took a lot out of you. I'll be sure to get it back. I gotta go. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do," Izuku said as he finished his portion of the cleaning. Handing the bottle to Kaminari, he headed for the door. He frowned slightly as he heard quite a bit of noise on the other side. Sure enough, once he opened it up, there was a sea of students all crowded around the classroom. "Is there something we can help you with?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. Before any of the students could answer, Bakugo came up from behind and spoke up. "They're scoping out the class that was victorious against real villains," he said in a tone that was somehow both angry and arrogant. "Did you know, depending on the outcome of the festival, it's possible for students in other classes to be moved up into the hero course?" a student said as he made his way through the crowd. He was just a bit taller than Izuku, with wild purple hair that was spiked up. Something that stood out was that it looked like he hadn't slept in days. "That's supposed to scare us?" Bakugo replied angrily. "It's a statement. Consider this a declaration of war," the purple-haired boy said before walking off. Following that statement, a blonde-haired boy from Class 1B stepped forward and began antagonizing the rest of his classmates. He sighed, shook his head, and cut through the crowd, not wanting any part of that. Coincidentally, he ended up walking in the same direction as the purple-haired kid from a couple seconds ago. He must have heard him coming up from behind him as he stopped and turned to face him. Izuku didn't stop or even look at the boy as he passed, but did leave him with something to think about. "If you're declaring war, you better have the power to back it up," he said, and continued on his way. Leaving school, he didn't go straight home, rather he stopped by a family mart to get some snacks. He went through the aisles grabbing whatever looked good before getting in line to pay. As he got closer to the cashier, he noticed a glass display case with trays of donuts inside. His mind immediately remembered a few years ago how Bruli would always give him a free small donut when he'd go to her stand with his mom. He blinked and realized he was next when the man in front of him crossed his field of view. "Can I also get a box of donuts, please?" He didn't even wait until he got home and began munching on the treats. A week passed by in the blink of an eye, and it was finally time for the sports festival. In that time, he'd focused on his schoolwork and getting in better shape. He was happy to say he was making progress. He didn't know if the mirror was playing tricks on him or not, but he looked bigger and was definitely faster as well. What he'd really made good progress on was his Busashoku haki, as he could coat any part of his body with it at will. He'd also made some progress on a technique he'd been wanting to try. He hoped he'd be able to use it in the tournament. He looked around to see all his classmates in their P uniforms all talking amongst themselves, most likely trying to calm their nerves. All classes had their own waiting room assigned to them and were told to wait until President Mike, who'd be one of the announcers along with Aizawa, called them to the field. Izuku leaned back against a wall and closed his eyes. As he'd been doing any chance he got, he relaxed and focused on his Kenbunshiku haki. He could still, in a sense, see everyone around him, including the crowd that filled the stadium. He could feel their excitement as well as the students' nervousness. Only two apart from himself weren't nervous. Bakugo was one of them. The other, well, he was heading in his direction. "Todoroki, do you need something?" he asked calmly, staring at the white and red-haired boy. He didn't get an immediate answer as his classmates stared unflinchingly at him for a few seconds before responding. "Looking at things objectively, I think I'm stronger than you. However, I know you have more power than you lead us to believe." The fight against the Nomu proved that. Their little talk had gotten the attention of the rest of the class by now. But I'm going to beat you, that's what you gonna say next." Izuku cut him off, causing Todoroki to frown. Whether it was because he cut him off or knowing what he was gonna say, he didn't know, but he enjoyed the look. Internally he smirked as he didn't even need his haki to guess where that conversation was going. If he wanted a challenge, he'd get one. "You're strong, Todoroki, but don't think you're strong enough to compete with me. I don't know where this came from, whether you see me as some sort of threat or if you feel like you have something to prove, but I'm not losing to anyone," Izuku replied. The two stared each other down, and some of the guys were even getting ready to come between them, but stopped as an announcement finally came. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the UA Sports Festival to begin. Are you ready?" The voice of President Mike boomed through the arena. From the sounds of the crowd, it looks like he got some pretty positive feedback, unlike at the entrance exam. "Introducing to you first, from the Hero Course Class 1A, he yelled out. The students all lined up and began walking out into the field. The crowd cheered louder when they finally made it, and they were escorted to a certain spot on the arena and were told to wait. President Mike went on to introduce 1B, the support course, the business course, and the general ed course. Once all the introductions were out of the way, Midnight made her appearance and walked up to the podium and motioned the green-net up. Representing the students is Midoriya Izuku from Class 1A. Making his way up, he noticed everyone looked to his class, then to him, and began to quiet down as he stood in front of the podium. Even the lively crowd quieted down to make sure they wouldn't miss anything. He stood in front of all of UA and looked everyone over. Had he been the same kid he was years ago, he'd say something like, "Everyone do your best," with the occasional stutter, but now, "UA," he began, "I know there's been talk ever since the incident a few days ago. As a result of that, there seems to now be animosity between classes." He continued, looking at Class 1B and the purple-haired kid from General Edition. "So I'll say this, I know a lot of you may see me as a target simply for being in 1A. If you're coming to get me, come get it. It's not going to be easy and you know it." He finished and began walking back to his class, ignoring the glares and boos the students were throwing his way. Midnight smirked at his declaration and took the microphone again. "The first event will now begin," she said, pointing a hand up towards the giant monitor. On screen the words, "Obstacle Race," appeared. The first event is the obstacle race. As its name implies, it's a race in which you'll have to get through a series of obstacles. The first 42 will continue to the next round. All students to the starting line. The screen cleared up and began displaying the view of the course. The students did as they were told and walked out with their classes and gathered at the starting line. He could feel the majority of them being nervous or scared. That'd make it easier for him. He bent down and reached for the ground to stretch. Some of the others followed suit and began limbering up. He glanced at his classmates and figured at least half of his class had a chance of making it. The business course was most likely finished here, and the support course had some chance. He briefly wondered how the purple-haired kid would get through this, but stopped those thoughts as Midnight made herself known. "I've been waiting to try this," he thought to himself as he prepared to start. Everyone began leaning forward slightly, looking ahead to try and get the lead as soon as possible. Izuku, on the other hand, kept his gaze straight on the woman. Her figure for a second longer than acceptable before his eyes went to the small gun in her hand. He calmed his breathing and focused. The world took a blue hue and seemed to be moving in slow motion. Like this, he watched as her fingers slowly squeezed the trigger and moved. He jumped forward almost as if he was diving into the ground and turned himself into mochi. The crowd went wild inside the stadium as they watched him take the lead by turning himself into a spinning donut and taking off. Following him, Todoroki took off using his ice to propel him forward with Bakugo hot on his trail, his palms firing explosions rapidly. The rest of the students used their quirks to try and make something happen or simply tried to run as fast as possible to try and get within the top 42. If you were to look inside the mochi donut up ahead, you'd see Izuku's head looking to the side to guide himself. His vision saw a red shape coming up in the form of a hand coming down. It was the same size as the robots he'd gotten through at the entrance exam. Seconds later it was within view, and sure enough its hand was rising up as it prepared to strike. Grunting in annoyance, Izuku forced the mochi to spin faster and accelerated right as the fist came down to strike. He moved a bit to the left, letting the fist hit the ground, and continued on his way. "I'll just let Todoroki and Bakugo take care of it," he thought to himself from within. At his speed he was quickly able to see the next obstacle on the course coming up. It seemed to be a cliff with a drop-off. Some ropes were connecting the small islands, and it was a no-brainer that they had to balance their way across if they had no other means. Making his donut jump into the air, he released the technique, turning himself back. Using the momentum he'd gotten while spinning, he extended his arms as far as needed before coating his hands in haki. His fingers dug deep into the ground on the other side and forced his arms to retract. The crowd cheered loudly as his body shot from one end of the obstacle to the other. "Ladies and gentlemen, Midoriya from Class 1A is making quick work of the track. Todoroki and Bakugo are just behind and are fighting for second place. Man, this is exciting. Don't you agree, Eraserhead?" Present Mike announced. A less enthusiastic "yeah" was heard over the speakers. Once on the other side of the cliffs, he soon came across the minefield. He couldn't use his Kenbunshiku haki to help as the mines didn't have strength, presence, or any sort of intent. "No matter," he whispered to himself as a couple arms grew out of his back. Including his own too, all of them began building pressure before firing into the minefield, effectively detonating the explosives. One by one they set off, causing a chain reaction, setting others off. The crowd groaned in disappointment as the area began being covered in smoke. Apart from those, he could hear the sound of Todoroki's ice and Bakugo's explosions getting closer. He jumped, turning into the donut again, but this time covered himself in Busashoku haki under the cover of the dust and debris. Some explosives went off near him but didn't do damage. Once he saw he was coming to the end of his cover of smoke, he released the haki and cleared the field. With the building in sight, he sped up and jumped once inside the building, making a show of turning himself back to normal in midair and sliding to a stop, crossing the finish line. In first place, Midoriya Izuku. "Let's hear it for him, everybody," Present Mike yelled. Izuku looked around at everybody cheering and let a smile grace his face, knowing his mom was watching. One event down, 2 to go. A few moments after crossing the finish line, the rest of the students began trickling in. Todoroki followed by Bakugo, then most members of Class 1A. Most of the students had their hands on their knees as they inhaled deeply, trying to catch their breath. He could see some looking distressed as they crossed the line, no doubt hoping they had made the cut. "All right, everyone, here's the list of the top 42 who will be continuing on to the next round," Midnight announced. Immediately all eyes turned to the board except Izuku. Having finished first, he didn't bother looking up. Instead, he looked around to see his classmates' reactions. That would tell him all he needed to know. Sure enough, all of them looked satisfied. Well, most of them did. Momo looked upset, and he could faintly hear her complaining to the girls about something Mineta did. She must have felt his gaze as she turned her attention to him and shot him a small smile, which he returned. Something that didn't go unnoticed by Momo's fellow girls. He couldn't help but feel amused as he watched the girl's face begin to turn red as Mina whispered something in her ear. Luckily for her, she was put out of her misery by Midnight announcing that the next part of the festival was about to begin. The jumbo screen lit up with the words, "Cavalry Battle," on display along with some images to go along with it. The voluptuous woman went on to explain the rules of the battle. Each team was to be comprised of at least 2 members and 4 mechs. The main objective was to collect the other team's headbands. Each participant had been assigned points to them depending on how they placed in the race. Izuku, however, was worth the most at 10 million. Naturally, this put a giant target on his back. She proceeded to give them 15 minutes to assemble their teams and prepare for the event. He looked around to see who he could possibly recruit and saw everyone rushing to form a group with the best odds of winning. He turned his attention to Momo but saw that she was already in a group with Todoroki. Pity. I only really need one person, he thinks to himself as he scouts the others. Damn, if only Todoroki hadn't taken Momo for his team. A part of him thinks the dual hair-colored boy picked her to spite him. Wait, that was it. He looked closer to the ground and saw just the man he needed. Heading in his direction, he noticed everyone keep their eye on him, but none made an effort to recruit him. "Mineta, please join my team," he told his short classmate. "I'll be the legs and you be the rider." Mineta scratched the back of his head, looking nervous, and glanced around to find someone to take him. He was out of luck, however, as like his classmate, no one wanted to team up with him. "I don't know, man. Everyone will be on us if it's just us two. Hell, even if we had 4, we'd be a target. Don't worry, I have a plan. Your quirk will be perfect for this event." Seeing that he wasn't getting through to the young man, he went through everything he knew about Mineta in his head up until now. All the conversations he'd overheard in class and things the boy had said. He smiled inwardly as he figured out how to talk him into it. "Minty, you like women, don't you?" That got his classmate's attention. "Would I be wrong to guess that you're trying to be a hero for recognition? I'd imagine doing good in this event and proceeding to the next one would really help get your name out there," he pitched. He saw the purple-costumed boy's eyes widened as he took in his words. "Just a little more. I think if you got strong enough and your name gets out there, eventually you'd be having women that look like midnight hanging off your arm." He had to refrain from shaking his head at the now drooling boy. While he didn't have thoughts as lecherous as the shorter boy, he couldn't deny it wouldn't be half bad if women like Midnight gave him their attention. "I'm in," the boy all but yelled. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. "Good. Now we wait for the event to start." The two boys stood next to each other for the next few minutes until the 18-plus only hero took the mic and told all the teams to get ready. Izuku stood in front of Mineta, and those who had their eyes on him watched as his body turned into the familiar white color indicating him using his mochi. The other competitors, now having their riders secured, turned to the duo to see Izuku form 2 giant blobs of mochi behind him, though they were still connected to his body. Slowly the mochi began to change shape, stretching and compressing in certain areas until 2 copies of the green-haired boy were standing behind him. They were perfect copies, the only difference being that they were fully white and the clothes they wore were also made of mochi and had no color. The 2 were connected to him by a thick string of mochi attached to his back. "All right, Mineta, hop on," he told the smaller boy as all 3 Izukus knelt down. Mineta jumped up and his eyes widened when a small seat was made out of mochi for him to sit on. He wiggled in the seat only to see that he was completely stuck there. "Perfect. He has no chance of falling off and my clone technique worked. As long as they're connected to me, I can move them freely," Izuku thought as he turned to Midnight, who along with the crowd stared in fascination. "All right, students, on my mark. Begin," she announced. As expected, the teams all moved at once, those closest to the duo coming after them first. Willing his mochi to do as he wanted, the 2 clones jumped back at the same time as he did, avoiding a swipe from one of the teams reaching for the headband that he'd entrusted to Mineta. "I'm going to need your quirk for a bit," Izuku told his partner as they headed away from the teams. The 2 clones extended one of their arms along with him. "I need 6 orbs on each arm, please." Doing as he was told, Mineta began popping the balls off his head and placing them on the mochi limbs presented. Fortunately, his head didn't bleed from the amount of orbs he took off in the process. Once done, the greenette retracted the arms. "It's over," he commented. Mineta wasn't sure how, but the finality in his classmate's voice was enough to make him not question it. The 2 continued to run around the arena, making sure to always keep the headband out of reach. Bakugo and Todoroki both came at them plenty of times, only backing off when another easy target was near them. "As long as we keep our headband, we don't need to do anything," Mineta said happily. "True, but we're here to get the pros to notice us. We're not just gonna run around, we have to do something to stand out. That's where these come in," he replies, indicating to his 3 arms that still have Mineta's orbs attached to them. "Well, it has to be soon because time is running out," Mineta told him. "No one's gonna be impressed like this." Izuku nodded. "How fast can you throw those balls on your head?" he questioned as he smacked the hand of one of the 1B students that was trying to reach for their headband. "Pretty quickly, but if I take too many, my head will start bleeding." "Perfect. Once we're upside down, you start throwing the balls as fast as your little body allows you to." Mineta's eyes widened and was about to ask what he meant by upside down, but was stopped as he felt himself propelled high into the air, well above the stadium. All eyes turned to them as they hit the peak of the jump and turned themselves upside down. The sound of Mineta screaming was drowned out by the cheers of the crowd. "Whoa, what is this?" President Mike yelled. Everyone watched as Izuku used his arms to create momentum for them, allowing them to be spinning at a rapid pace as they began their descent. "Go!" Getting over his fear, the small boy begins pulling the balls off his head and throwing them upwards towards the ground. Down below, the competitors all knew what was happening and began moving around, doing their best not to get hit by the balls. Class 1A knew if one touched you it wouldn't come off until Mineta manually removed them. Class 1B tried to avoid but didn't do much after one hit and didn't do anything to them. In the end, every team ended up being hit due to the fact that they were all grouped together and there was only so much space to move. Some hit in the arms, others in the head, but the majority of the orbs hit the ground. As they neared the ground, the mochi user hardened his body as they landed to avoid hurting himself. What a move! They landed in the center of the arena. What will happen now? Mike asked the crowd, which only served to fire them up even more. Fuck dude, we're in the center. There's only seconds left, everyone's gonna get us. Mineta panicked. Calm down. You think the girls are gonna like someone who starts panicking at every little thing? That worked like a charm as the perverted boy immediately ceased his screams and tried to look serious. They're gonna come at us. But due to the orbs on the ground, they'll have to take specific steps to get to us unless they want to be stuck in place. He thinks as he looks around them, taking note of where the orbs landed, which makes predicting where they'll be easy. Midnight announced that there was 10 seconds left until the event ended and everyone used the remaining time to try and take their headband. Izuku smirked as the teams approached. Here we go. Once they got close enough, the 3 arms that he had Mineta put orbs on all shot out in different directions, each one sprouting another arm wherever an orb was placed. The result was 21 arms being shot out in total. Incredible! Mike yelled as all the arms retracted and the duo once again jumped into the air to ride out the final seconds. Midnight called for the event to stop just as they began their descent. Upon landing, Izuku and his 2 clones each raised their arms into the air, showing multiple headbands in their possession. The crowd went wild as the images of Izuku and Mineta were displayed on the screen as being in first place, but stopped shortly afterward as Midnight asked for their attention. We have a unique situation here. The next phase of the festival requires the winners of the cavalry battle. However, we've never had a case where one team collects every headband. Normally a handful of teams would continue on, but in this case we'll be taking a brief recess to discuss how we'll proceed. Please take this time to use the restrooms or to get some food and drinks. We'll be back shortly, she announced before walking off to find out how they'd proceed. It was about 20 minutes later when the voluptuous woman returned. Thank you all for your patience. After discussing it with the rest of the committee, we've decided that the cavalry battle will be restarted. However, the team consisting of Midoriya, Izuku and Mineta Minoru will not participate as they have qualified for the next event. The rest of the teams please prepare to start again, she announced as she led the 2 away. The 2 young heroes in training were led back into their class's waiting room and told to watch until it was time for the 3rd event. The teams all battled it out against each other again. This time there was much more action between them as they weren't all going for a single target. A little while later the event concluded and the winners were selected for the final round. Midnight once again asked for everyone's attention and went on to explain the next event. This will be the final event of the UA Sports Festival. It will be a tournament-style battle consisting of one-on-one matches, with the winners moving up the bracket until ultimately only the champion remains. The first round will be as follows, she says, motioning to the screen. It lit up, revealing a bracket showing who would be fighting who. Izuku looked at the bracket, trying to find out who he'd be facing. Looks like he'd be going up against one Shinso Hitoshi. Shit, she's gonna kill me, I know she is. Looking down, he saw Mineta staring at the screen and followed his gaze to see he was going up against Mina. He patted the boy's head twice and gave him a silent, good luck, before breaking away from the others. Everyone was looking around trying to find their opponent, either to say good luck or to trash talk in the case of a certain 1B class member. The first match will begin in 1 hour, starting with Midoriya Izuku versus Shinso Hitoshi, Midnight announced before walking off. The crowd all seemed mildly put off as they had to wait once again, but many stood to stretch or even head to the restroom again to not miss any of the action to come. An hour later, both the fans and the pro heroes in attendance were ready. The fans because they knew this year's first years were different from the rest. The pros were of similar thought, though they wanted to see just how much talent they could possibly recruit. Will Midoriya and Shinso please make your way to the stage? Midnight called from the center of the fighting ring. This only seemed to egg on the crowd even more as the 2 competitors appeared and stood facing each other. Up in the crowd, the students who didn't make it to the finals were also watching in anticipation. Those from 1A more so than the rest. They were all looking, hoping to see what else their green-haired classmate could do. They'd seen him fight a bit during his battle against Bakugo, but that had been more of a one-sided beatdown. They were hoping someone, namely Todoroki, could push him to really try. Begin, Midnight yelled before moving out of the ring. The 2 boys stayed still, neither moving or saying anything until Shinso spoke. After this match ends, I'll be taking your place in 1A. How exactly do you plan on doing that? The green-haired boy asked, genuinely curious. Shinso sounded too confident in his words but hadn't displayed anything to back up his claim. The moment the words came out of his mouth, he felt his body stop responding to him. He could move his eyes and think but couldn't force his body to move at all. Just like this. Go ahead and walk out of bounds, Shinso ordered. His body turned and began walking towards the edge of the arena, much to the shock of the spectators. So that's his game. He brainwashes people. He thought to himself as he tried to force his body to obey. Come on, stop. He yelled inwardly to no avail. If he had the ability to, he'd be grinding his teeth in anger and frustration. He'd made it this far only to be told to lose like this. Damn it, I said stop. He yelled in his mind. What happened next was felt by everyone. All throughout the arena, all normal spectators, students, and even pros felt a sudden pressure surround their being. The crowd was silent as the pressure increased, and suddenly one by one people began falling over with their eyes having rolled into the back of their heads. Most of the normal civilians and some of the general core students along with a small portion of the pro heroes met the same fate. As quick as it had happened, the pressure suddenly lifted. For a few moments no one said a word. People around the arena have been knocked out. What's going on? Is it a villain attack? Present Mike yelled while looking around frantically. No. Eraserhead's monotone voice cut in. Everyone turned in his general direction in the commentator's box, waiting for him to elaborate. It was from Midoriya. All eyes immediately turned to the green-haired boy who was glaring at his opponent, not the least bit affected by what had just happened. The lack of reaction and look on his face was what led his homeroom teacher to deduce it had been his doing. Izuku took a deep breath and used his thumb to crack each finger, making sure his body was obeying him again. Shinso meanwhile looked at him with wide eyes, not understanding how he'd broken his control. Izuku rushed forward towards the purple-haired boy. He at least respected Shinso a little more when, rather than stay frozen in place, he tried to punch him as soon as he'd gotten close enough, but it was no use. Izuku's body opened up, letting the fist go through him, and delivered a hard right to the boy's face. How did you break my control? Shinso asked as he shakily stood up while rubbing his chin. Unfortunately for him, his green-haired opponent didn't answer this time, having deduced how his technique worked. Izuku pulled his right arm back and willed it to increase in size before punching Shinso out of the ring. Shinso has been knocked out of bounds and is unable to continue. The winner is Midoriya. Said boy rolled his shoulders a bit as he walked off the stage and back into the waiting room where the others still having to fight were at. No one said anything to him as he stepped inside and sat along the wall, but he could feel all eyes on him. Now that he had time to rest, it hit him. I used Haoshiku Haki, he thought to himself. He'd successfully used all three types and couldn't wait to learn to call it at will. Up in the stands, the buzz was getting out of control. The first round of the one-on-one style matchups had concluded, and while people were talking about those matches, the topic most people were discussing was the upcoming fights. One fight in particular between Midoriya and Todoroki. The students of Class 1A and B sat together, albeit in different sections, watching and cheering on their classmates who were still in the competition. Just because they had been eliminated didn't mean they wouldn't be cheering on their own. Zero, who'd been eliminated in the first round, spoke. I'm kind of bummed that I lost so quickly. But at least I'll get to see this. Midoriya versus Todoroki, who do you guys have your money on? He asked. Kirishima, whose match against Tetsu had ended in a draw, weighed in. They're both strong, but I say Midoriya. It can go either way really. Jiru commented while twirling her earphone jack around her finger. Midoriya has finished first in the last two events. The second one he basically won by himself with a little help from the greatest of all people. He added. Todoroki has shown more raw power though. As we saw in his fight against Zero. She finished. Everyone nodded in agreement. The wall of ice Todoroki had made was large enough that it even slightly spilled out of the arena. That's true, but don't you guys remember what happened at the USJ? Kaminari pitched in. They did. No one could forget their first major villain attack or the fight between their green-haired classmate and that monster. Though thinking back now, it's kind of strange. The electricity user trailed off. Strange how? Mineta asked from beside him. The small grape-themed boy had managed to shock everyone by ending his match against Mina in a victory but was deemed unable to compete due to the injury he took. His strategy was similar to that of Midoriya's during their brief stint as a team. Flood the arena with balls that would limit the pink-skinned woman's movement. It managed to work slightly as he cornered her and saw an opportunity to knock her out of bounds. He didn't count on her spitting acid at him in midair as he went for the win. He kicked her out of bounds, but his arms were coated by the acid from her quirk. Luckily, Recovery Girl was at the scene in seconds and managed to heal them to a degree. They weren't permanently damaged, but he did have burns which rendered him unable to continue. Well, he made holes in his body to avoid the punches by turning his body into mochi and rearranging himself. Kaminari explained, using his hands to try and mimic how Midoriya's body moved. What has me confused is that he was staring that thing in the face the whole time. To predict where punches would come from, you'd need to be focusing on body language too. Midoriya just stood there though, not looking anywhere else. Aoyama nodded, his twinkling never dying down as he did so. That's true. It's almost like he knew where the punches would be beforehand. Kaminari smiled and punched his open palm with his other hand. So he must have the ability to somehow see the future. He concluded proudly. Glancing around, he was met by the blank stares of his fellow classmates. Looks like you've fried your brain one too many times if you ask me, Jiru told him. Come on guys. One of you has to agree that it makes some sense, right? He asked, hoping someone would stick up for him and back up his theory. Unfortunately for him, no one was buying his theory, even though he was unknowingly spot on. Similar to the students, even some pro heroes in attendance were talking about the upcoming battle. From small-time heroes and sidekicks all the way to the big names. Endeavor's kid is up next and he's going against Midoriya. This should be an interesting matchup. A female voice spoke. She had short blonde hair held back by a headband adorned with purple claws covering her right eye. She wore a dark red chipao that had a yellow claw pattern towards the bottom and black knee-high boots along with white sleeve-like gloves that covered her arms. She was the current number 10 hero Ryukyu. Next to her, another pro hero and current teacher of Class 1B, Vlad King, nodded. The man was dressed in his hero costume consisting of a red jumpsuit with silver trim around the waist, white boots and arm guards which had a small wire coming out of them connecting to his back. Todoroki has both fire and ice at his disposal, and while he's shown he can use his flames, he refrains from doing so, which severely limits him even if it doesn't look like it at the moment. Midoriya, however, has shown great mastery over his quirk, using it in ways others probably wouldn't. Plus he has the ability to somehow cause people to pass out. He replied. The dragon hero nodded in agreement. Midoriya has a strategic mind as well. He only used one person for the cavalry battle and forced things to go his way. Hell, he forced a restart by taking every team's headband. That wasn't one of the ways I imagined the event ending. They couldn't continue their conversation as the two young men came out of the tunnels. It's starting. The two young heroes in training stepped onto the platform opposite each other. The crowd grew more anxious as they stared each other down. Todoroki had a look of intense concentration, narrowed eyes locked onto his classmate. His breath was visible with every exhale as he had his quirk ready to be activated at a moment's notice. Midoriya meanwhile had his arms crossed and wore an impassive look on his face as he returned the stare. He knew Todoroki was looking forward to facing him. He didn't know why, nor did he care to either. Whatever made the boy decide to try and compete with him was on him. If Todoroki thought he could take him, he was welcome to try. He briefly went over what he knew of his heterochromatic opponent in his mind. His quirk allowed him the use of both fire and ice, though he seemed to be relying completely on his ice. Fire was available for him too, but for some reason he decided not to use it. From what he'd seen, he tended to end fights rather quickly by flooding the surrounding area with a pillar of ice before they could react. Midoriya didn't need to use Kenbunshiku Haki to know how the fight would begin. Midnight stepped onto the platform in between the two, microphone in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, the first match of the quarter-finals between Midoriya and Todoroki will now commence. The crowd roared in excitement as she swiped her hand down and jumped back. A split second before she began the match, he'd already had his right arm cocked back and coated in haki. The moment she jumped back, officially starting the battle, his arm shot forward, rapidly increasing in size as it did so. Predictably, Todoroki began the match exactly as he expected, with a giant wave of ice heading straight for him. His haki-coated fist made quick work of the ice, shattering it on impact. Everyone in the arena raised their hands or whatever they had at their disposal to cover themselves from the bits of falling ice. Woa Midoriya managed to stop the ice right as it happened. His reaction time is insane. Present Mike yelled in excitement. He was preparing that attack before Midnight began the battle. Eraserhead commented in a much less exuberant voice. He must have been studying Todoroki and predicted how he would start the battle. He finished. Eraserhead had seen footage of the battle his student had with Bakugo. He knew his fighting style well enough to predict his every move and react accordingly, and he did the same to Todoroki. Midoriya wasted no time and dashed forward, zigzagging to avoid being impaled by ice shards that were appearing from the ground. Todoroki is a long-distance fighter, Midoriya thought as he ducked under a giant ice ball. The fact that he's creating distance from me proves it. His reliance on his quirk most likely means he's bad at hand-to-hand combat. All I have to do is get in close and it's over. Midoriya sidestepped as another round of ice shards made their way towards them. Raising his arm up, he built pressure at the forearm and fired. As soon as his arm detached, his mochi took the form of a new one and solidified. He favors his right side. He mumbled to himself and dashed forward. Sure enough, the white-haired ice user dodged the flaming fist by dodging to the right, only for his eyes to widen as Midoriya's knee suddenly connected with his face. The moment he'd moved, Midoriya had used his mochi to extend his knee to where Todoroki would be. The force of the kick was hard enough to send him tumbling backwards, his body bouncing a few times before leaving the arena. Though it seemed he still had his wits about him, as he had enough sense to create a platform of ice to keep himself from being eliminated. "You're going to have to do better than flooding the place with ice," he commented. He watched as his opponent jumped back into the fighting stage. "Use your fire," Midoriya ordered. His eyes flashed red for a moment as a quick flash of an image appeared in his mind. Quickly pressurizing his arm once more, he fired just in time for it to collide with another car-sized slab of ice. "You said you believed you were stronger than me. Without the other half of your quirk, your already low chance only gets lower." To his disappointment and slight annoyance, Todoroki didn't budge and instead swiped at the air in front of him. Midoriya didn't miss how part of his body was beginning to freeze, as he had constantly been firing wave after wave of ice. He coated his arms in hockey in a split second and dashed forward to punch the incoming ice. As he destroyed the ice, another image flashed before him and he tilted his head to the left. Todoroki had counted on him destroying the ice and attacked right as the ice was destroyed and his vision was impaired. He had to give credit where it was due, though. It would have been a good plan had he not seen through it. His surprise continued as Todoroki got up close to him, throwing combinations of right and left hooks. Midoriya blocked and parried the blows easily for a minute or two, analyzing his pattern before retaliating with his own. He threw a straight right while using his mochi to extend his arm and increase his speed. The sudden increase in speed made it next to impossible to be blocked. The moment the fist connected, for more sprouted from his body and followed suit. The fact that he had tried a sneak attack and was trying to block let him know he'd reached the limit with his ice. He managed to block 2 or 3 punches but couldn't keep up with the onslaught as more fists broke through his defense, each landing a clean hit on his face and chest. Midoriya called the arms back to his body after 20 or 30 punches and took a step back. He'd seen the color red flash in his mind for a brief second and smirked when small sparks began surrounding the left half of Todoroki's body. "I'd rather not give him the satisfaction by doing this, but I have no choice," Todoroki said, finally igniting his fire. "You asked for this, don't blame me for what happens next. There's only one way this ends and you're not going to like it," Midoriya replied, letting Todoroki melt the ice stuck to his body and charge up his flames. Todoroki chose not to respond, instead cocking his arm back with his fire ready to destroy anything in its path. Seeing what would happen, Midoriya blasted forward right before the attack was let off. Once he got close enough, he increased his speed further, disappearing completely right as the attack was fired. With his view obstructed by the giant wall of fire, Todoroki never noticed that his target had appeared on the other side of the arena. Cementos quickly jumped into action, creating multiple concrete walls in order to shield the crowd from the oncoming attack. The few walls he built held up enough to take most of the force but eventually shattered. Seeing that Todoroki was already at his limit, he decided to end it. He extended his right leg to sweep the boy's feet from under him, followed by Willow Mochi to create 8 more legs. One by one the legs came down on him, each hitting his upper body. The ground began to crack with each stomp until he was in a small crater. One of the legs shifted into the shape of an arm, which picked him up and placed him out of the arena. "Todoroki is out of bounds. Winner, Midoriya," Midnight called out after checking on the boy's condition. Midoriya began making his way off the fighting stage as the on-site medics and recovery girl went to check on his classmate. He'd be alright, he didn't try and kill him. Plus, with recovery girl there, he'd be back up in no time. The devil fruit user made his way back through the halls of the arena and made a slight detour when his stomach began to growl. Everyone was most likely still in their seats ready to see Bakugo battle next, so the lines for food shouldn't be that bad. As he made his way to the concession stand, he noticed a familiar ponytailed girl walking in his direction with a drink in her hand. "Hey Midoriya," she greeted with a forced smile. "Congratulations on winning your match." "Thank you." Unfortunately I lost mine against Tokoyami, she said downtrodden. It was pathetic really. All it took was 3 hits and a few seconds and I was done. Not wanting to see the person he considered his only friend up until this point sad, he replied. He was a bad matchup for you. The two of you share a common problem with Todoroki. You've become reliant on your quirks and have low close-quarter combat ability. The reason Tokoyami won was because his quirk is a long-range type and could keep you at bay. His quirk had the advantage over yours. Momo looked down in thought for a second before looking back up at him. I know this might be a lot to ask, but could you help me? Help you? Yes. She nodded. If I had close combat abilities, I could have created something to contain Dark Shadow and take down Tokoyami up close. It could also come in handy if for whatever reason my quirk isn't working. She had the right idea. Everyone in his opinion should learn how to fight up close and not rely on their quirk all the time. Plus she created the trident, which he was going to get back after the festival, for him without asking for anything initially and settling on an IOU. This could be the perfect way to pay her back. It'll be difficult and I won't go easy on you. If it helps me get stronger and become a better hero in the future, I'll work through it, she said with a determined look on her face. Fine. We'll discuss it after the festival. Seeing the smile on her face at his acceptance of his request made him feel strange. Happy but in a strange way. He wasn't sure how to describe it, but it was pleasant. Momo headed off to join her classmates and he continued on his quest to buy food. He ended up buying enough to last him through the rest of the quarter and semi-finals. Though he did have to take a quick break to fight Ida. By the time the finals rolled around he was sufficiently stuffed. Ever since he ate the mochi no mi, he found he needed to eat a lot more than others. Everyone turned their attention to the giant screen on the wall which displayed his picture as well as that of Bakugo's. He sighed. He really didn't want to fight him. Not because he didn't think he could win, but because he knew the outcome already and it wouldn't be the least bit interesting. Hearing his name be called, he stood up and made his way down to the arena for the final time. Bakugo was already in position, lightly bouncing up and down on his toes while his palms let off miniature explosions, eager to start the battle. Get ready, Deku. It's not gonna go down like last time. Bakugo yelled with an angry look on his face. Midoriya stared blankly at the ashy blonde and turned to Midnight. The older woman smirked and brought the mic up to her mouth. The final match of the sports festival will now begin. She brought her hand down and jumped back. Bakugo let off 2 large explosions from his hands which propelled him forward at incredible speeds. He's certainly faster than last time, Midoriya thought as he leaned back and let the boy fly over him. Similar to last time, Bakugo used an explosion in midair to change directions and aim his other hand at him. Turning into Mochi, he took the form of a donut like he did during the obstacle race and moved in time as the ground below him exploded. Midoriya continued to roll around the arena as small explosions went off behind him, each just slightly off target. The Mochi user jumped and turned back into himself with his arm pulled back in midair. Extending his arm, he shot a hockey-clad fist towards the blonde who managed to tilt his head at the last second. Everyone watching from above or from a broadcast had their eyebrows raised when the fist continued to extend and turned at a 90-degree angle 3 times, making its way back towards the explosion user. With each turn it seemed that the Mochi fist sped up until it tagged the unsuspecting blonde in the cheek before returning to its owner. Midoriya smirked. Good, it works, he thought. There was a move he'd been wanting to try since he'd seen it a few years ago. It wasn't one of Katakuri's original techniques, but it would definitely come in handy. Don't look down on me because you got a cheap shot in Deku, he yelled. Bakugo propelled himself forward and made a beeline towards him. This time though he positioned his hands in a way that small explosions he generated began to make him spin fast enough until it looked like a black tornado coming at him. Focus, he thought. He saw where the blonde's head would be in a second and acted. He sped forward until he was under Bakugo and kicked his leg directly up, managing to clip the boy in the chin. The tornado disappeared as the spinning came to a halt. Here goes. 10 arms sprouted from his back, each coated in hockey. The way the sun hit revealed that it wasn't completely black but had a dark green tint to it. As expected, Bakugo righted himself in the air in order to land on his feet. However, the moment his legs touched the ground, Midoriya was on him. 4 arms began assaulting the boy while the others stayed still. Bakugo managed to hold off the arms for a few seconds before he was overwhelmed and began getting tagged quickly. Finally, Midoriya willed the other arms to move. Similar to the first punch, all of them began turning at sharp angles, all the while staying within a certain radius. The crowd winced as the blonde was hit hundreds of times in a matter of seconds by arms that were nothing more than a blue at this point. One of his arms hit his opponent in the leg, bringing him down, and all at once the arm shot down at him. Before they reached, however, Bakugo was surrounded in a concrete dome courtesy of Cementos. His eyes flashed red and the image of a hand pulling something passed by. Knowing only one hero he knew of did that, he quickly held his breath. Just in time as a pink mist began taking over the stage. Bakugo is unable to compete. The winner of the UA Sports Festival is Midoriya, Midnight called out. She glanced at him and widened her eyes when she saw the mochi user still standing, looking unbothered. Elsewhere. Is that him? A voice asked from a black screen. Yes, sir. He's the one that took down the Nomu. Kurogiri answered. I see. Keep an eye on him. There's more to him than we think. In what way? Kurogiri asked, curiosity clear in his voice. The way he fought today interests me. Even if you know your opponent well, it's almost impossible to anticipate their every move in order to counter. Find out what you can about him. Without saying any more, the screen shut off, leaving the occupant of the room alone to his thoughts. The day following the UA Sports Festival was calm at the Midoriya household. While he was definitely glad that he'd won, the level of competition wasn't something that would keep him celebrating long. He and his mom had a nice dinner at home for a job well done containing his favorite food, and that was that. The woman definitely wanted to make it a bigger deal but respected his desire to keep it simple. All celebrations had concluded, on his end at least. If the group text that he'd been added to by the rest of the class was any indication, many were still enjoying the bliss that came with being noticed. Since there was no class today, he had no reason to be out just yet, but those that did found that their names had gotten out there. The most vocal about this had been Mina, who was enjoying the attention. Good morning, sweetie. Midoriya turned his attention away from the inside of the fridge to look at his mom, who was patting down the business suit she was wearing. She quickly fixed the lapel and made her way over to him and proceeded to pull him into a tight embrace, bringing him down to her chair's level. I'm so proud of you. My baby won the UA Sports Festival, it's all over TV. She said with tears threatening to escape her. Despite not feeling as thrilled about it as she did, the green-haired student still smiled brightly and hugged her back. Would you believe me if I said it wasn't that hard? He asked. Inko let him go and carefully wiped her eyes with a napkin, careful not to ruin the small bit of makeup she had on. Tossing it aside, she looked over her son, who was already dressed in a pair of jeans and a dark green t-shirt. Are you heading out to work already? Midoriya asked with mild confusion, checking the time on the stove. Yeah, I'm leaving a little early. I have to fill out some documents for tax and employment purposes. Then I have to fill out a disability form and I should be all set. She replied happily. It brought him joy to see her so excited about something as menial as a job. He'd known for a while that being home all the time was bad for her. Sure, she took time out of the day to clean the house and make sure everything was attended to, but with him at school and the events over the past month, she was surely getting too anxious. He could only imagine what it was like seeing your child fighting on TV or being involved in a villain attack on top of already being partially disabled. While he was busy with school, she had spent time looking for a part-time job, something to keep her occupied. They received enough money monthly to get by well enough thanks to special programs in place for villain attack survivors, but it wasn't enough to live comfortably. Delightfully, she had found an office nearby that was in search of someone with a skill set she had studied in. It was a single-story building, he'd checked, and didn't mind her health condition. Plus, the payment she would be receiving would make sure she had a bit more money every month. Will you be okay by yourself? I should be back sometime around 10. She asked with a bit of worry in her tone. It seemed like no matter how much he proved that he could take care of himself, she would never worry any less. I'll be fine. Will you be all right? Midoriya replied, emphasizing the word you. His mother huffed and rolled out of the kitchen. I can stand just fine, you know? She shot back. It's just a couple of hours and I can sit whenever the strain becomes too much. They won't have me carrying any heavy boxes or any of that kind of thing. Good. Carefully putting her heels on, his mother turned to look at him as he was setting his plate on the dinner table. What will you be doing today? Resting, I hope. She added quickly. Midoriya smiled and shook his head. No. I'm actually not going to be here all that long. I have plans today. He trailed off. The green-haired woman's curiosity was instantly piqued. She knew her son and he wasn't the most social boy in the world. Perhaps prior to her incident when he was younger he was more outgoing, but over the past few years he had grown more reserved. Things for him had changed drastically after eating what he had called a devil fruit. Hours spent on the computer watching videos of All Might saving people from a burning building turned into hours of him out training. She had caught him plenty of times in his room, turning his hand into various different weapons with a timer in the other, working on switching out faster. The pride she felt for her boy only increased when she saw him in action. The way he was able to manipulate something as simple as mochi and use it in an advantageous way demonstrated incredible creativity. In that regard, he was still the same as when he was younger. What kind of plans? Inko asked. She all but expected him to stay home all day, perhaps train a little bit, but going out? That didn't sound like her boy at all. Please tell me you're not going to do anything dangerous. I don't need to be worried sick at work. Midoriya sighed. I'm going to be with... He paused. How would he describe Momo? They spoke a few times. She created his trident for him without asking for anything in return. Then she opened up to him about how she felt regarding her loss against Tokoyami during the finals. A friend from school. He finished. His words caused a bright smile to illuminate his mother's face. You're making friends? That's fantastic. She cheered. Which one is it? Is it the boy who dresses like a grape? She asked, referring to Mineta. It wasn't a bad guess based on the information she had. He was the only one she had seen him interact with during the festival, so it was the only logical choice she could conclude. Midoriya took a bite of his food, chewing slowly to gather his thoughts. No, it isn't Mineta. It's Momo. Inko blinked owlishly, her mind going over all the names she'd heard while watching TV. It took a second, but the image of a young woman with a ponytail flashed through her mind. That's a girl. She replied slowly, her mind still trying to process the information. Correct. I know you know better, but I feel as your mother I need to tell you anyway. Whatever you get up to, be safe and don't do anything that will have lasting consequences. She advised. The green-haired man stopped chewing to stare back at his mother, who somehow believed that he was meeting up with a girl to do something else. Swallowing quickly, he shook his head no. She asked for help with some basic training because of how things turned out for her. Not for whatever you're thinking. He clarified. It'll be fine. It better be. Now I need to get going. I'll see you later tonight. Love you. She said, making her way out of the door. Once the front door closed, Midoriya let out a sigh of relief. His mother's words had brought up some rather inappropriate images of his classmate to appear in his mom. He would be the first to admit Momo was definitely a good-looking woman. The way she had smiled at him after he agreed to teach her had him feeling warm inside. Just like the man who'd had the fruit before him, he prided himself on his emotional control. Still, even though she definitely made him feel strangely happy by smiling at him, that didn't mean he wanted to continuously see her in a lewd manner in his mind. He was better than that. Damn, they won't go away. He muttered to himself before taking another bite of his meal. Looks like he would have to meditate for a bit to get himself under control. He had to meet with her later, and he'd rather not get flashes of the face he was seeing whenever he looked at her. An hour and a half later, after letting his meal digest, he had changed into a black tracksuit he owned consisting of a lightweight jacket and sweats. Grabbing his phone, he sent a quick message to Momo making sure everything was still in order. Before the young man had a chance to put the phone in his pocket, a message came through assuring him everything was good. Glancing at the clock, he knew he would need to head out now in order to make it to her house on time. Making sure the stove was off and all the light switches were off, he made his way out, locking the door behind him as he did so. The trip back to Momo's house was uneventful with the exception of a handful of people wanting to take a picture with him. They seemed nervous, probably because of his stoic face, but in reality, he was more than willing to meet a few people. Being a hero was something that he'd wanted since he was a child, and the small act of people wanting his picture or autograph in one case proved he was well on his way. He arrived at the Yaoyorozu household with a few minutes to spare. Walking up to the front door, he was greeted by one of the many workers who kept up the maintenance of day-to-day affairs. Good afternoon. Midoriya greeted respectfully with a small bow. Good afternoon. Yaoyorozu is waiting for you in the training room if you would follow me. The man replied calmly. Stepping inside, he silently followed along the familiar corridor until they arrived at the training site. Opening the door, the man ushered him in and made himself scarce. Momo stood across from him, standing on a dark blue mat, bending down as far as she could to touch her toes over her sneakers. Like him, she was also dressed in a tracksuit with the only difference being the color, which was a combination of light pink and white. Oh, Midoriya, you're here, she said with a smile. He looked away as the memories of what his mother had said began to bubble up in his mind. Yeah, I hope you're ready, he replied easily. I was thinking we can begin with basic hand-to-hand combat and then move on. Against Tokoyami, you lost because he kept you at a distance. But even if you'd gotten close, you would still need to be able to control the battle. She nodded, having already come to the same conclusion. Do you have any experience when it comes to fighting? He asked curiously. She didn't seem like a front-line fighter, but with her background it wouldn't be too surprising if she had some basic training. I don't, she denied with a bit of sadness. Like you told me the day of the festival, I've relied on my quirk too much. Stretching his left arm across his chest, he shook his head. That's not a problem, that means we have a starting point. Do you still have those training dummies? He asked, looking around the area. Yes, give me a second. We used to have some laid out all the time, but they were destroyed not too long ago by a large trident. She teased. Even he couldn't help but make a face as the memory played in his mind. He had been a bit too excited that he'd managed to get his hands on a trident that he didn't think how easy it would cut through the dummies. Sorry about that, he replied with a bit of embarrassment. I'll get that trident back, by the way. Your work won't go to waste. In any case, the dummies can be used some other time for distance attacks. Momo waved it off nonchalantly. Don't worry about it too much. We can get it back some other time, for now let's start training, she said, bringing a fist up to chest level. Very well, we'll start with a spar. Before we start though, you have to understand that you will be getting hit. You won't improve if you don't feel any sort of danger, Midoriya explained. The black-haired young woman swallowed the lump in her throat but steeled her resolve. I'm prepared to get some bruises. When we become heroes we'll no doubt sustain some sort of injuries. Whatever it takes to get stronger. The green-haired hero in training cracked his fingers and stood across from her, his arms firmly set across his chest. Your task will be to land a clean hit on me. You can use your quirk if you'd like, but don't think I'll give you enough time to create something. Just one hit? In the face? Momo questioned. Anywhere, so long as it's not a blocked attack, Midoriya replied calmly. Whenever you're ready we can begin. Momo turned her body slightly to the right, putting herself in a slightly off-orthodox boxing stance. She seemed to have some decent grasp on the style. Her hands were up in front of her face but a bit too far apart. Her body was relatively stiff, meaning it wouldn't be too difficult to read her attacks as they came. The young woman closed the distance between them quickly and opened the spar with a left jab that was easily batted aside. Not letting up, she followed it up with a strong straight right hand, only for her opponent to easily weave out of the way. Midoriya's hands came up and caught the following jab and pulled towards him. Momo's balance was thrown off and she found herself stumbling forward. To his surprise, just as he launched a very underpowered kick towards her stomach, her left leg quickly raised up in time to absorb most of the blow. Her small victory was short-lived, however, as a fist soon connected itself with her left cheek. The force behind the punch was also dialed back, with nowhere near the amount of power he used against Shinso or Bakugo. Having decided against using any type of future sight, however little he had access to, he was surprised at the movements the woman took. Her head spun with the punch and her body followed. Using the momentum gathered, Momo extended her right leg to deliver a spinning kick aimed directly at his head. His right arm came up and took the blow. There was decent power behind it, but not enough to move him from his spot. Letting her take a step back, he put his arm back down and wondered what she would do next. Getting back in position, Momo wiped her mouth with the back of her hand to get rid of the small amount of blood that spilled from the small cut she'd received. That was a good attack. I didn't expect it, but it was too slow and gave me time to react, he explained. Momo nodded at his words and he could see that she was making mental note of them. She was an intelligent woman. He had no doubt that she would retain information quickly. It was mostly her body and technique that they would need to work on. Try again, Midoriya ordered firmly. Once again, Momo rushed in, throwing a combination of jabs, punches, spinning elbows, and a few roundhouse kicks. She did a good job at switching up her combinations, but her movements were still too stiff. The way she moved was linear, giving him easy reads and allowing him to move well before the attacks were let off. Ignoring her jabs, he made sure to make her pay for every straight right that wasn't thought through. She had a tendency to overstretch, making it easy to parry and retaliate. Half an hour later, Momo was panting deeply. Her jacket had been discarded, leaving her in a black tank top similar to the one Uraraka had used in her battle against Bakugo. Her face was bruised around the cheek area, but it wasn't anything too bad. She would definitely feel it tomorrow, but by the following day it would likely be healed. Despite the beating she was taking, her resolve hadn't dwindled at all. Rushing forward, she threw another straight right. Tilting his head to avoid the punch, Midoriya was about to chastise her for the attack, only for his eyes to widen as an image flashed through his mind subconsciously. The moment her wrist was next to his cheek, her skin began to glow and he was forced to duck under a large nail that she had created. He felt it pass through his hair harmlessly, but he wasn't out of the woods yet. In a typical display of brilliance, Momo's left hand had been placed strategically low, knowing he would have to duck the attack. His face was illuminated by the glow of her quirk activating once more, and he saw a large metallic pipe quickly making its way toward his face. She's learning, Midoriya thought, pleased with her developments. Up until now she had tried to face him with nothing but her limited technique, but it seemed now she'd studied him enough to implement her quirk. That brought a small smile to his face. To surprise him even further, the light began to spread across her arm and multiple different metal and wooden objects began to form. Each of them came out of her arm aimed in a separate direction but all facing forward. She was trapping him in such a way that no matter which way he moved, he would encounter one of her creations. Within seconds the objects were ejected from her body. Momo smiled triumphantly as they approached him, only for the smile to die down a moment later when his body began to morph. Multiple different holes sprouted over his body, letting all of her creations pass through him. That's not fair. She whined in an almost childish manner. Midoriya couldn't help but smile at her. No, but you still pass. Wait, but I thought I had to hit you in order to pass. She asked confused. You did, and you forced me into a position where I had no choice but to use my quirk. Otherwise you would have definitely hit me. So yes, you pass. Momo exhaled deeply and allowed herself to fall into a sitting position into the mat below them. Now that the exercise was over, the fatigue finally began to catch up to her, revealing just how out of shape she was. Take a moment to catch your breath, next we'll work on your reflexes. For that, I'll need you to create a few rubber balls. He told her. Her head tilted slightly in confusion. Of all the things she thought she'd need to make, rubber balls just seemed out of the ordinary. Midoriya tossed them a few inches into the air and caught them just as quickly. Seeing the dark blue bits of rubber reminded him of his own training with them. Alright, the next part of training will be to improve your reflexes and reaction time. You're going to stand in front of that wall over there, he said, pointing at the furthest wall of the training room. Momo looked confused as to why he would ask that of her but complied nonetheless. Standing with her legs spread reasonably apart, Momo shifted her weight from side to side, her eyes staying glued on her green-haired classmate. Midoriya's body began to melt into mochi, gathering at his feet before spreading around a wide area. The small puddle of mochi began to shift and rise up, taking the form of her classmate. First one, then three more followed, almost perfect copies of him only without color. They looked like figurines before they were painted. Each one held a rubber ball in their hand and began tossing it into the air like the original. All you have to do is not get hit, Midoriya said with an amused tone present in his voice. Once all four Midoriyas cocked their arms back, Momo realized what was about to happen. One by one the rubber balls were thrown at her, some flying higher than others. For 20 excruciating minutes, Momo was forced to duck, dodge, and roll out of the way without moving past a certain border. The sound of rubber colliding with the wall and occasionally flesh rang out for the next 40 minutes. In that time, the light sweat she had built up had turned into waterworks. Her top had been darkened and wet drops on the ground from when she had to evade were proof of it. Alright, I think we can stop for today, he called out. Momo exhaled and dropped to the ground, uncaring that she laid on the bare floor. Her chest rose and fell quickly as she tried to catch her breath. Thank God, Momo muttered to herself. Midoriya smiled at the sight and helped her up once she felt like there was enough air in her lungs. It was a good first day, he said. I saw what we need to work on. I'll draw up a schedule for you and give it to you the day after tomorrow at school, he finished. The rich girl nodded but winced as the damage she'd taken during their exercises finally caught up to her. Holding her ribs in discomfort, she tried to stand up as well as she could. Thank you for helping me today. When can we do this again? She asked. Whenever we have a chance. You have my number. As long as school doesn't leave too much work we can probably meet during the week, he replied. That works for me. Well, I better shower and get some cream on these bruises. Should I walk you out? She asked politely. He shook his head. I know the way. Good work today. Momo preened at the compliment and bowed to him slightly out of gratitude. Thank you. I won't let you down. I hope not, because it's only going to get harder from here. XXXX. 2 days later, Midoriya found himself back at UA. Classes weren't set to start for another 10 minutes, so some of his classmates had yet to arrive. Those who were here already, however, were chatting excitedly about the outcome of the sports festival. Like him, most had been recognized and even asked to have their pictures taken on occasion. It really gave them a sense of what pro life would be like, perhaps not to the same degree, but it was a small taste nonetheless. He briefly wondered what they would be focusing on now that the festival had concluded. He didn't have to wonder long as their homeroom teacher walked through the door a few minutes later, now free of the bandages that once covered his entire body. His face still looked as bored and uninterested as ever, but there was now something different behind those eyes. Aizawa glanced at everyone, and without needing to say a word, the class settled down. "Sensei, your bandages are gone. How are you feeling?" Mina asked in her usual chipper tone. "Better," came the single-word reply. "Anyway, we'll be having a special hero informatics class today," he announced, getting straight to business. The class collectively leaned forward in anticipation of what could be in store for them. After what they'd gone through, it could be anything. Aizawa opened his mouth and spoke 2 words. Code names. Even Midoriya perked up at that. This was it, they would be choosing the names they would go by for their professional careers. He was sure most of his class had thought about it in the past and were likely to decide or had a few names in mind. He himself had a name ready as well. After forcing the class to calm their excitement, the man continued. "This is related to the pro hero draft picks I mentioned the other day. The drafts begin in earnest in the 2nd and 3rd years, after students have gained experience and can become immediate assets to the pros," he explained. His eyes glanced around the room and, seeing he had everyone's attention, continued. "In other words, for them to extend offers to first years like you shows that they are interested in your future potential. Do keep in mind those offers are often cancelled if their interest in you dies before graduation. And here are the totals for those with offers," he said, clicking a button on a remote. The electronic screen at the front of the classroom came to life and displayed a chart reading, Class A No of offers. Unsurprisingly, Midoriya's name was first on the list with an extended bar with a number at the end that read 6004. Below him was Todoroki with 4123, then Bakugo with 3556, and Tokoyami with 360. The gap between the 3 of them was insanely large, and the class took notice. In other years it's been more spread out, but all eyes were on these 3 this year. Aizawa explained. "Those pros don't know a good thing when they see one," Aoyama said dramatically. Momo turned to Midoriya with surprise clear on her face. "That's incredible. You almost have more than 2,000 more offers than Todoroki." "Thank you. Though I wonder if any of the top 10 took an interest," he replied. "Keeping these results in mind, whether or not anyone asked for you, you will all be participating in an internship with pros," Aizawa lectured. "You have experience with real villains, but it will still be meaningful to see pros at work firsthand. So that's why we're picking hero names." One of his classmates yelled out. "Well, those hero names are still temporary, but if you're not serious about it..." Aizawa's sentence was cut off by the abrupt opening of the classroom door. "You'll have hell to pay later," a feminine voice rang out. All eyes turned to the 18-plus only hero Midnight as she swayed into the classroom. Because a lot of hero names used by students become recognized by society, and they end up becoming professional hero names, she finished. Temporary or not, Midoriya already knew the name he would be taking. There was no real reason he could think of for it to get denied, and he would do everything in his power to make sure society knew it. He wanted the people to feel completely at ease when they heard his name. For them to know he was the strongest, and that everything was under control the moment he arrived. There was only one name that would be fitting for that. "Midnight will be making sure your names are okay," Aizawa muttered as he took out his yellow sleeping bag. "I can't do stuff like that." White bards were passed out and everyone was instructed to write the name they had chosen. Some began writing right away, eager to present, while others seemed conflicted. Mineta was tapping his head with the marker and muttering to himself. Bakugo up front was furiously scribbling away and others were calmly writing and shortly after erasing. Midnight watched the students carefully for 5 minutes with an excited look on her face. Once more than half the class put their markers down, she clapped her hands and moved herself away from the podium. "Okay. Let's start presenting names, beginning with those who are ready," she called out. Unsurprisingly, Aoyama was the first to volunteer and took his position behind the podium. Midoriya raised an eyebrow as the boy cleared his throat. He knew Aoyama was an eccentric individual, and for that reason he couldn't think of what the boy would have chosen as his name. Whatever it was though, it would be something completely out of left field. "Here I go," the blonde muttered. "The shining hero, I can't stop twinkling," he announced. Midoriya exhaled. He should have expected something like that. He chose a sentence as his name, he thought to himself with amusement. Fortunately, Midnight took the board from him and began editing his name to something a little less terrible. Mina had been the next to present, choosing to name herself after the alien from the movie. That too had been shut down. Luckily after her the names became somewhat normal and creative. Uraraka had chosen the name Uravity, which was a clever way to relate it to her quirk. One by one the students went up, proudly calling out their names. It usually started with something hero, followed by their actual name. A good idea in his opinion. The last thing you wanted was for the people to give you an epithet. Todoroki had chosen his given name as his hero name, and Bakugo used his family name. Momo had gone with the everything hero, Kriati. Finally all eyes turned to him. Taking the whiteboard, he held it in a way that would hide the contents of the board and made his way to the front of the class. He could hear some people trying to guess under their breath what his name would be. They figured it would be something mochi related, and for the first part they would be right. Standing behind the podium, he grabbed the whiteboard and flipped it over for everyone to see the katakana written down. The mochi hero, katakuri. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub, share and donate for more videos.